Coming up right now, the newest episode from Carr, Gwyn, and Ode on Three Pagans and a Cat. Hi, welcome to the interview series with Three Pagans and a Cat. And I'm Carr.
You may call me Ode.
Merry meet. My name is Gwyn.
And our guest today is Kenn Day.
We are very happy to have you here.
I am very happy to be here with you.
So would you do me a favor and just kind of let people know who you are, where you came from?
How you got on this path.
How you got where you're at?
They might be going, what are we talking about?
God, where to start? You know, it's always interesting when someone asks that question. It's like, okay, where to begin? And right now, I'm in the process of writing yet another book.
Oh, cool.
It's not a book about shamanism.
Oh, interesting.
As some people realize who have known me for more than a few years, I teach shamanism, but for years, like 30 years, I also taught something called Shaya. And Shaya is more like a spiritual tradition that had smatterings of like ritual magic and things like that.
Okay.
Essentially, it is a way of deconstructing the self so that you can reconstruct it, but healthier.
Interesting. Yeah.
It breaks up the divine into four pieces, four faces of the divine. Jhana, which is the great mother, all form, the physical body. Maga, all life force, fire, flame, masculine, dad. Kiata, who's the child, consciousness, air. And Anohi, which is both the one from which all else emerges and the all else that emerged from it.
Interesting.
Union and water, both water and spirit. So I did that for about 35, 40 years, and then decided that community of people who had been going through that process, going through the initiations and meeting the mysteries and all that, kind of got to a place where I think we're done. I think we can put this away as it is. And then over the last couple of years, I've just been sitting with it and letting myself go back to those initial transmissions and re-evaluate it and see, how do I actually want to present this? Because when I first put it out there, it was very limited, and I kept it very close to my chest. You know, I felt very responsible. I was like a newborn child, I wasn't going to let it go out and play with just anybody. So literally for 35 years, I mentored people directly. I initiated them. And there was only one other initiator and maybe 15 other mentors who trained with me or trained with one of my students.
Okay.
And that just came to the point where it's like, okay, we're done. Time to put this away and we'll revisit it later on. So now I'm at the point where, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. The spirits are poking at me. I'm already working on another book on shamanism. But to answer your question...
It's okay, that was super interesting.
Yes, it really was.
I actually, I love the idea that I'm a professional shaman in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's my day job.
Yeah.
We've got, my wife and I have an office building. We got tired of having to move to a new office every 5 or 6 years because someone would buy the building or they'd expand their business and we'd have to find another place. So we bought this old house that was built in 1864. Right? You go down to the basement and there's bark on the trees that they used.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And we've got a railroad that goes right past the back of the house.
That's
kind of cool. I wish it was a commuter thing.
And had a stop in your backyard?
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So we have a business down there called Body and Soul. Find us at Body Soul Cincy. That's BODYSOULCINCY.com. And then that has links also to my shamanic work. So yeah, I've been doing that full time since 1989.
Wow.
That's wonderful.
That's crazy.
What a wonderful
That's a long
thing to
time,
do as a career.
It is.
That's really wonderful.
I mean, I've been telling people that right livelihood is a good idea for years, but of course I can't teach that if I'm not living.
Right, yeah.
So it feels good to be able to say that.
Yeah.
And I live down there in Cincinnati with my amazing wife, who's a shiatsu practitioner and yoga teacher, amazing yoga teacher. She has many superpowers, among them the ability to look at a person and how they move and immediately assess what's going on with them, what they need to do, lifestyle changes, all this.
We need to go visit Cincinnati.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Please, we bought one.
There we go. I also designed business cards
Very
and
nice.
the website.
Very
Pass that
cool.
around. And we do have this amazing daughter, Megan Quinn Sharon Day. It's a full name, and she lives up to it. She is amazing, and she's the one that got the rest of the family into Irish dance.
Oh, okay.
She started Irish dance when she was like 4 years old, and then Patricia got into it, and just a couple months ago I started doing it.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, it's so that I could dance at her wedding.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
yeah. That's very cool.
It'll be a few years when she's 9.
Yeah.
Hey, you got time.
Yeah.
Right.
You got time.
Which means you've got plenty of time to get good
Yeah.
That's right.
at the dance.
Well, up to a point. You know, I'm talking about this stuff because so much of me and so much of shamanism is about family. It's about real life. It's a spiritual path, but it's a very grounded, embodied physical path. Unlike a lot of spiritual paths that get very cerebral, very esoteric, if you can't bring it down to earth and make it work, I'm really not interested.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be able to fit into making
Who you are.
Who you are and making
Yeah.
a life.
And it has to work.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in passing on teachings that don't work.
Right.
They have to work for me first. If they don't work for me, I'm not about to share them with anybody else because that's just embarrassing.
True.
Right. Yeah.
But then, I mean, I've been passing these teachings on since 85, 86, something like that. And I've got people in the current cohort down in Cincinnati who came to some of the early ones back when I just did opening inner doorways. It was
Okay.
the first workshop, and I tried to cram everything into a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That hurt.
Yeah.
Not just me, but the poor people who were trying to receive all that. So I finally got it through my thick skull. Okay, I need to kind of break this up a little bit. So now
Give it room
it's
to breathe.
exactly.
Yeah.
So now there's a million weekends
There you go.
over about 2 years,
Okay.
and that's still pretty compact.
Yeah.
But at least it gives people time to unpack it in between. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
once every
gives you a little
2
bit
months.
to sit with it, integrate.
Yeah.
Well, as we were saying before we started, could you give us like just a basic, I know it's probably hard, but a definition of what shamanism is?
Absolutely.
You know, for those of us who have never done shamanism, really understood
So-
it as a practice.
Shamanism is not a religion.
Mm-hmm.
To be a shaman, I'll give you the definition of what shaman is. Okay? A shaman is someone who, first of all, is chosen by the spirits. And what this means is that an ongbong, or a shamanic spirit, somebody who has had at least one lifetime as a shaman and wants to pass that on without embodying right now, who's hanging out in the upper world and waiting for a good candidate to come along, has looked down into the middle world and goes, oh, there's a likely person, and poked at you.
Okay.
Sometimes with a semi, sometimes with a 2x4, but they get your attention
Mm-hmm.
and they say, you should do this work. What the work is that you go into altered states, trance states, intentionally. So this isn't channeling, this isn't being possessed.
Mm-hmm.
This is intentional trance states that they go into at choice and they come out of by choice. But you go into the trance states in order to go into the spirit realms. And we go into the spirit realms in order to communicate with spirits, go figure.
Yeah.
So we go and communicate with the spirits in order to bring back information, divination, and bring about changes, healing. That's basically it. And the other salient point here is that all of this needs to be in service to someone besides yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the post-tribal shaman, because the difference with a tribal shaman is that they're in service to their community, to their tribe. So I coined the term post-tribal shamanism back around 88, 89. And I did this because I was trying to come up with a way to describe what I did that was both descriptive of the changes, the differences between this and classical indigenous shamanism, while respecting and acknowledging that there was something that came before this that is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are plenty of indigenous shamans out there.
Still working.
Exactly. And I have a lot of respect for them. Now, right now, there are, following that description of what shamanism is, that definition, there are indigenous shamans that are working in tribal cultures.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we Westerners don't really get about tribal culture is that they have a different kind of consciousness. They literally have tribal consciousness. Tribal consciousness means that if they come up and you go up and introduce yourself to them, they're going to introduce you as their tribe. If you look at what is the most important element of our culture, it's going to be me.
Yeah,
Right.
we have a very individualist society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True.
In a tribal culture, it's the tribe that's the most important element. And those individuals are easily sacrificed for the good of the tribe. But things have changed. So the techniques that work for an indigenous population, a tribal population, don't always work so well for our post-tribal culture. One example of this is the technique of soul retrieval. So, real briefly, when we get traumatized, our unconscious self goes, ow, that hurt, and we take some of our energetic matrix that's holding all these different pieces of our soul together, and we blow it out and we leave it there. And with that, we carry away the portion of the trauma that we can't handle in that moment. Okay? See, this makes sense.
Yes.
Some part of you goes, oh yeah, I did that.
You reject the. It's not quite dissociative, but it sounds like it's related to a dissociative state.
It's a very similar
Rejecting
mechanism.
the pain so that you don't have to directly deal with it.
Exactly. So you do that too much, and you start kind of falling
Wear
apart.
yourself thin.
Yeah. And so in a tribal culture, the shaman most likely will go and journey for the client. Go back, get that lost stuff, bring it and put it into the client. What I do with my clients is I bring them into shamanic body and have them journey with me back to the place of the trauma and have them reabsorb that, retrieve it themselves, and help them reintegrate so that it's them again. So then instead of them leaving my office going, oh wow, Ken really fixed me, it's, oh wow, I really did that. I feel really strong.
Empowered.
And powerful.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the very word. So that's the kind of difference. That's what I mean by post-tribal.
Right.
So would you say that's a trust issue? Like in a tribe, the individuals in the tribe know and trust that the shaman is responsible for interacting with the spirit world for them. That's that person's role.
Right.
In post-tribal society, you don't necessarily have that ongoing lifetime relationship with the shaman.
Or anyone else.
Yeah, or really anyone, maybe even in your family.
Right.
You don't necessarily, even if you encounter a professional shaman like yourself, right?
Right.
I haven't known you my whole life the way I
Right.
would know a shaman from my
Okay.
own tribe my whole life.
Right. But just sit here for a moment, look into my eyes, and you know that when I say something like I just did about, you know where it resonates within you. And you
Oh,
go,
yeah.
oh yeah, that's true.
Oh no, I trust and believe you.
And well, that's part of the job.
Okay.
I need to have really strong integrity, and that means that inevitably I will screw up. I have done, okay? But I need to own that, and I need to be in a process of constantly healing my own wounds. And in a way, it's that
Physician, heal thyself.
Exactly. Well, they call the shaman the wounded healer. Because, once again, going back to the spirit ally getting your attention, that's usually very traumatic. It certainly was in my case. So I'm still healing wounds all the way back to my childhood. But that very process of healing sets up a particular resonance that then engenders that. It's like you take two tuning forks, strike one, and then start moving them together, and this one starts vibrating. So it sets up that resonance that then brings up that healing resonance in a client.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Since we're talking about tribal and post-tribal shamanism, do you find that, because there's a lot of talk today about appropriation. Do you find, and I don't mean to open a can of worms, do you find people,
I would say
giving
that
you
there are
difficulty because
a
of
lot
that?
of people who assume that because I'm doing shamanism that I'm
You're
appropriating.
stealing it from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I find hilarious is that there are people who at least claim to be Native American saying that they're shamans and I'm not because I'm white.
See, that's my.
But
I
shaman
wondered if you had some issues with that.
isn't a Native American word.
No, it's a Siberian word.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's
Tunguska?
tingly.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right, and so at least it's been in the European lexicon since the 1600s.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is a word that anthropologists use.
To describe this kind of work.
Exactly.
To
All
describe
over
this
the world.
role.
So maybe it's kind of.
And that's how the word shaman became disseminated.
Okay.
And
So
that's
is it
why
through
the,
academia.
the people in Native American tribes will now, they have their own words for it,
Right.
but when they're talking to us,
so that we understand, they'll use
they'll
the
call
word
it a shaman.
Okay.
Right.
So do you think it's like maybe become much ado about nothing, or
You
is
know,
there real issues there?
There are
for some
there's a
people?
difference. Okay, there is a difference between true cultural appropriation,
Right.
where in a sense, a very aggressive culture is taking whatever they want from a dominated culture because they can.
And usually without reference to context.
Right.
Okay, but this isn't doing that.
Right.
The only thing that I'm taking from another culture is the word shaman. And sorry, guys, that cat's been out of the bag for
For a
hundreds of
long
years.
time.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For a long time.
And I use that in the same way that a Siberian shaman or a Mon shaman in Tibet or one of the shamans of the people in Mexico or
Korea.
the Mudan.
Yeah.
Sami.
Everybody,
Yeah.
they all have
Yep.
their own names. But
Exactly.
This is kind of just the generic word.
Right.
It's
that
the
we
publicly
can-
understood.
The
It's
publicly
the
understood
universal
word.
term
Yeah.
for this practice.
So like we say paganism, but it also, and for the three of us, it's three pagans and a cat, but it's a witch, a heathen, and a druid.
Right. Right.
It's the same kind of,
It does kind of slide off the
Concept.
tongue better than a witch, a pagan, and a druid.
right, yeah. Walk into a bar, oh wait, no.
No, no, thank you, because I think what you do is wonderful. And from what your description is, from the description you've given to me, because that's a healing practice for people. Like, and you were saying you have to have a life of integrity so that when somebody comes to you as a client, they don't know you,
Right.
but they can trust.
Right.
Without having this previous relationship, they can trust that you're going to take them safely on this journey
And bring them back in one
and bring
piece.
them back in one piece.
Well,
and
a lot
I
of
think
that
that's a beautiful
is
thing.
trusting that. Put this. I worked with a number of veterans, combat vets, and one of the things I've learned from them is that they don't trust anyone who hasn't been at least as traumatized as they were.
Right.
Okay, and they can smell it. And I know because I can usually tell a combat vet just walking in a room because they're just as traumatized or more than I am. And there is a sense of this is a person who has walked their journey in the same way I've walked my journey. And so at least I'm not having to expose myself, my wounds, to somebody who is going to freak out or be
careless with them.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Somebody who's going to honor it because they've had their own path.
Right.
That's probably the biggest part of that.
And it also sounds to me like somebody who's like maybe interested in exploring shamanism really needs to understand this isn't about themselves necessarily so much as it's about what you do for others.
A lot of it depends on whether or not you're chosen
Yeah,
by
because
a
you had
spirit.
brought that.
You know, there is nothing wrong with studying shamanism if you're not chosen, just to have
Just to learn.
to learn and
have the
and really to
understanding.
enrich your own life. Because
Right.
part of it is that it gives you an opportunity to directly connect in with your ancestral soul, with your celestial soul, with your ancestors. Be able to be more sensitive to the land spirits, the land whites, and so on.
Is it something you would recommend for people, even if
Absolutely.
they're not going to follow that necessarily as a path or
Yes.
a practice, but just to enrich themselves?
What I've noticed from a lot of my students over the last 30 years or so is that many of them will take the course and then take what they learn and apply it to whatever their own spiritual practice is. And find that it's very helpful because it's all about stuff that already is. It's like when you meditate and you go into non-dual awareness, where you're not making something new. You're simply accessing something there that has been there for humans since there have been humans to have it. And in the same way, when I take people into shamanic body and show them the world tree, well, that world tree's been here a lot longer than we have.
Right.
It's not going anywhere. And humans have always had this capacity. I'm not doing anything new. I'm doing something really old in a slightly new way. But there's more in common between the practices that I do and a traditional tribal shaman than there is a contrast. There's much more contrast between the way I do shamanism and like a core shaman. Core shamanism comes from Michael Harner's work, where he noticed that there are all these shamanic traditions all over the world, and they have certain things in common.
And from this, he posited that there was sort of a basic underlying shamanism that everyone could access equally.
Right. And unfortunately, he didn't take into consideration the fact that without tribal consciousness and without that connection to the greater self, that you can't just imagine going down a hole when somebody starts drumming and immediately drop into journey. And so because of that, a vast majority of Westerners who have dabbled in shamanism don't know the difference between creative visualization and shamanic journey.
Okay.
So I want to be very clear, it is a very different thing. If you sit here and close your eyes and visualize a big oak tree.
That's not a journey.
No.
That's
You
didn't go anywhere.
You can pick that tree up and move it either way. You can turn it into a giraffe, no problem. You go into shamanic body, into lodge, and you meet the world tree. And you may not have a visual of it. It may just be a sense of presence there. But that presence is there. And it's there when you go back. And when you try and move it, it just smiles at you. Oh, that's so cute. And this is what we run into because people are constantly judging. And that's a good thing, and that we have to discern. Discernment is very important.
Absolutely.
Critical thinking is essential. And yet, we need to recognize that quite often when we think we're asking the question, is this real? What we're really asking is this the same as the physical reality I'm used to out there in my physical body?
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's very different. But if you can turn that question into asking, does this have a profound, lasting impact on who I am and how I engage with my ancestors, my family, and my friends? Yeah, it does.
Yeah. What I've found is that there's a difference between discernment and doubt.
Yes.
And B, the most useful question for me is not, is it real, but does it matter? If it matters, then yeah, it's real enough. Move on to the next step.
I like the question, does it work?
Yeah.
If it worked, well, there you go.
So, and because you've said post-shamanism is a practice rather than a religion.
Post-tribal.
Post-tribal.
Shaman,
Post-tribal is a practice rather than a religion. That is why people can incorporate it into whatever
Christian
their tradition
shamans,
is.
Jewish shamans, Buddhism is not a religion either. But
It's kind of its own
Wiccan
practice.
shamans, there you go.
Do you find people confuse shamanism with a religion?
Oh yeah. It's, in some ways it's presented as a religion because people assume that if there's a spiritual practice, it must be related to a religion. The spirituality of shamanism is animism, and people also confuse animism for shamanism. And animism is simply the belief that all things are alive. This table is alive, this room is alive, everything has spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, we have two hard animists in the room and one partial
I've got a
animist.
soft animist.
I did one thing I wanted to talk about. So I studied shamanism a little bit as a teenager, just in a gathering information kind of way. And one of the things I learned, or one of the things that was presented to me, was that essentially you couldn't be a shaman unless you had had a near-death experience. No?
What they're saying is that basically that's somebody looking at shamanism from the outside in and going, oh, all these people who were called shamanism or have these near-death experiences. Well, it turns out that there are other ways to be called shamanism too that can be equally as traumatic without actually having a near-death experience. So the important element there is not the near-death experience,
It's
but
the
the
smack
call
by a
from
spirit. So what we're looking at is enough situations in a row, I guess, where the call from the spirit was traumatizing in a physically damaging way.
Yeah, that's
But it
called
doesn't-
not paying attention.
But it doesn't have to be physically damaging.
Right. Yeah, I guess if you're not paying enough attention, the spirit's eventually
Right, it
going to get to
gets
that point.
It's
Yeah.
like, hey, you know?
They break down and use the semi.
Yeah. Much rather start when there's a stick.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
popsicle.
I got
preferably.
my attention. Okay. How about a toothpick? Yes.
I was
got
slow.
it. Now, you've written 2 books.
I
Can you
have.
tell us about those, please?
Well, the first book I wrote because I wanted to write a book that wasn't just going to be another book on shamanism. This was back around the mid-2000s, and there were already
A bunch.
a flux, a plague upon us of all the books on shamanism, many of which didn't really seem to have a lot of content that had much substance to it. So I wanted to have something that would be substantial, that would be readable, that would be enjoyable, and would be transformative. Because I was stuck with this idea that I didn't want to just write a book, because books are dead. And I wanted to do something that in some way offered an opportunity of transformation to the reader. And about that time, I met a woman from Germany, and we met up in the Catskills at a mystery school. It turned out to be not very mysterious. And she invited me over to Germany to meet her family and go on a road trip. And so I went over there, and her dad, Detlef, a really wonderful guy, loaned us his big red Mercedes station wagon. Now you have to understand, all the cars in Europe are about yay big.
Yeah.
And then here was this Mercedes station wagon. It was like a small US SUV.
Okay.
And there was not much else on the road that big besides the semis.
Okay.
So we're tooling around Europe in this
Boat.
This boat, this land yacht, which was lovely. Diesel engine, so I only put gas in it once.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you learn pretty quickly.
Yeah. And we started having all these wonderful synchronicities, and Lisa was picking my brain about shamanism. And I realized, well, I should be keeping a better journal, because this might be a really good way to write this book. And that became the narrative of my first book, Dance of Stones.
Okay.
So that came out in 2008, but the road trip was in 1998.
Okay.
But it took me a while.
To kind of...
And I first self-published it. Now, I had, way back in the late 80s through mid-90s, I was publisher and editor of a magical journal called Mesling Journal.
Okay, I've heard
You
of
may
that.
have heard of that, yeah. And I was an art director, and I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts. I've got a background in art and graphics and all that. So I thought, well, I don't really like some of these publishing contracts. So I'm going to go ahead and self-publish. So I designed it all. I bought my own barcode. I designed my own cover, designed the typography, all that. Found a really good, found the printer that we used to use for Mesling Journal down in Tarpon Springs, Florida, Marrakech Express, and had them print 1,000 copies of this book. So I think like sometime in May of 2008, I had all these books, these boxes of books show up on our front porch. And then over the next 5 years, 2008, I guess it was about 4 years it took to sell most of those, like 900 copies.
Right.
At which point I really got tired of order fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Did not mind the whole publishing thing. That was fun. But you put the book in the envelope and make sure there's a flyer in there for your classes, and it gets really old. So I found a publisher. It's actually a UK publisher.
Moon Books. Yep.
Right. John Hunt Publishing, Moon Books in print.
Yep.
They're great people. Easy to work with. They said, well, we'll publish this, but we want to do something new too. So I sent them a proposal for the book that I had written, Dance of Stones, to avoid writing. Because by that time I realized I kind of need to have a textbook for this workshop series, but which by that time was already 7 or 8 workshops long. So I put that together. They loved it, published it, and so that's how I got both books in.
And what is the name of the second book?
Post-Tribal Shamanism, A New Look at the Old Ways.
That's the one. Oh, way to remember it.
Yeah. I have the Amazon page up, though, so...
There you go. Both of them have gotten really good reviews. I'm very, very pleased and gratified by all the wonderful reviews.
That's good.
That's amazing. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate with that. So now I'm working on the Shea book, and I'm working on another book for shamanism that my working title in my head is all the different bits and pieces that didn't fit in the first two books.
It's kind of a long title. You might want to cut it down a little.
I think I'm going to call it Grandfather Tales.
There you go.
Because Grandfather is what I call my spirit ally.
Oh, okay.
And it's stories about Grandfather, stories that Grandfather told me, stories of things that I learned the hard way, etc.
That sounds
Very cool, yeah.
That sounds
very
really good.
interesting.
Yeah, yep.
So they've already agreed that they want to publish that.
Oh, excellent.
But I'm talking to a different publisher over here for the Shea book because I want there to be kind of a separation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, may I gather from the fact that you are publishing a book about Shea now that it is not going to be as closely contained
Exactly.
as it was?
I have finally gotten over myself to that extent and realized it's really not up to me to manage how people use these teachings.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and put them out there, and people are going to do what they want to with them. It's not up to me.
Right. How do you feel about people who use the word shaman but have none of the stuff? So,
None of the stuff.
well,
Fine stuff.
so I mean, we were talking earlier with
Trying to stir stuff up, aren't
with Saranth and James,
So well.
and we talked about shamanism, kind of esoterically, kind of on the side.
Yeah, just a little
But
bit.
and James was saying, there's like shamanic chips and shamanic this and shamanic that and
become
shamanic.
kind of
Commercial.
Yeah, it's become this.
advertising
A
buzzword.
sexy.
Right, yeah, it's a sexy buzzword to use. Do you feel that detracts from what you do, or do you
True
think,
work of shamanism.
or do you think it gives it a boost because now more people know about shamanism? I don't know. I mean,
Right,
it's
like-
Well, in a way, I mean, there's
SEO
about three
management?
different ways.
Yeah.
There's about three different ways to look at it. One is like cupping. Okay, you know what cupping is?
yes,
Yeah,
yep,
the hot cups and the...
Probably know what cupping is because what's his name in the Olympics a few years ago
yep,
Yes.
had cupping
Yeah.
done, right?
Phelps.
yeah. Michael Phelps, yep.
Right. So I had a set of cups sitting on my shelf for decades. And could get very few clients let me cup them because they didn't know what it was.
Right.
And it looked weird.
It does look a little strange.
Michael Phelps does it, and suddenly it's like
Everybody wants to be cupped.
Everybody wants it.
Yeah.
So I've dusted off my cups, and they're working. So there's a good element to that. Mm-hmm. People now come in and they go, "I saw that you do shamanism, and I'm not really sure what it is, but I heard from somebody that I might need." And so
Here's my problem. Can you help me?
you're right. And I can say either yes or I really think you need to see a specialist about that in psychotherapy.
Right.
Yeah,
Because shamanism is not psychotherapy.
right.
So yes, it's handy in that sense that more people now when they look at my business card and go, "Oh, shaman," fewer people have their eyes glaze over and they have no idea what that means. Now, many of them think they know what it means.
Right.
But that's the other side of it is, the downside is that people come to it with an idea of what it is that's completely spurious.
Right.
At the same time, it can be kind of aggravating, and I try not to let it get to me, that there are people out there who don't have a clue, but they had a really good mushroom trip back in the 80s,
Yeah.
and the spirit told them that they were a shaman, so by gum, they went out and set up their shingle, and they've been doing it in Sedona ever since.
Right.
There's a website on the internet, obviously, called Plastic Shaman, something like this.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, and they basically try to, what's the word, when somebody's getting rid of a hoax?
Debunk.
Yes, they're trying to debunk what they consider to be fake shamans.
Okay. Well, that's
I thought
good.
this was a great idea
Yeah.
because there are some people out there like, oh God, what's the one who wrote Jaguar Woman?
Oh, I've seen
Lynn
that
Andrews.
book.
Lynn Andrews.
I
Who
think
actively claims to have been taught by Native Americans
Okay.
who, first of all, are not in shamanic cultures.
Right.
And secondly, those very native elders say, we don't know this person.
Right.
It's like the Castaneda syndrome.
Yeah.
I was taught by an old Yaqui Indian elder, Yaqui Indians. We don't know you. And
Yeah.
those aren't our teachings.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I made it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I understand them going after people like that, all right? But I went to them, silly me, and said, hey, I think you're doing some good work here. I just want to be supportive. They jumped all over me. I said, well, how dare you say you're a shaman? What nation are you from? U.S.? And they went and checked my website and saw that I was white and that there's one little entry in a blog that I wrote at the time where I'm talking to somebody else and I mentioned that my great grandmother on my father's side was Cherokee. And they say, yeah, was she a Cherokee princess? And just
being rude.
Just being rude. And
Yeah.
obviously these guys have a chip on their shoulder the side of Mount Everest. And it's just a shame because they could be actually providing a decent service if they were showing any discernment.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's crazy that they would attack someone who's actually saying, "Thank you, you're doing good work."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that shows their own. That shows
But it
their
just
own
goes to
prejudice.
show you how distorted the whole thing is.
Yes.
There's a fellow who is on the internet a lot, who lives in Wales, whose name is Nicholas, and he is the curmudgeon of the shamanic internet. And he is a great one for saying, oh, those New Age wannabes, blah, blah, blah. And he is initiated by some Siberian shamans, and he's done work with Tibetan shamans, and he's good people.
Right,
and he also has been publishing Sacred Hoop, which is...
I've heard of Sacred Hoop. Yep.
Right, that's the shamanic magazine out there for the past few decades.
Yeah, long time.
So it took me the longest time to get him to even consider the fact that I might actually be doing shamanism. He finally actually read my book and gave it a very nice review.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Saying, oh, this is actually substantial and not a bunch of New Age hooey.
Right.
It's amazing what you find out when you actually read someone's work.
Read someone's work.
But
Instead of just making broad assumptions.
Yeah.
I get his point, though. When you have 35 people in a row come and say, I'm a shaman, and they don't even have a clue what it is.
Right.
Yeah. You develop sort of an instinctive
You expect number
rejection.
36 to also be that.
Yeah.
I think that's why, to be honest, I started in Wicca back in 1999, 2000. I went to some pagan pride days, and I went to some events like this. I don't know if shamanism, for some reason, I think some books were coming out. And I remember thinking that everybody and their brother was saying they were a shaman. And it felt false to me. And so that's why I was like...
It was trendy for
It was trendy, and so I guess... So
I think it's probably becoming trendy again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess that's why I felt like the people that I came across who were saying, "Oh, I'm a shaman," and I was like, "Here's a shaman, he's a shaman, she's a shaman, she too. Wouldn't you like to be a shaman too?" I just, for that reason, I never wanted to find out what it was.
Who can blame you?
So I'm really glad to now have that dispelled and understand what shamanism truly is. So thank you for that. Because I feel like I've been kind of judging a lot of people who probably didn't deserve to be judged.
Oh, believe me, I get judged because of their shenanigans as well.
Yeah, you get the blowback.
Yeah.
And I can't blame people.
Right.
See, look, I booked a good interview.
You
Well
often
done,
do.
sir. Well done.
It's a lot of good interviews. Yeah, no, so this has been incredibly informative. I want to get your books, and I want to get your new one when it comes out.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to learn more about this, because I feel like I've missed something that could really be beneficial.
Right.
Because it's, like you say, it's a practice that can be adapted.
My hope is that some of the people who are currently apprentices or apprenticing with me will eventually be out there teaching as well, which will increase the number of actual shamans out there.
Right.
People who you can go to and are just...
Because, it's a service-based practice.
Exactly.
And having more trained shamans out there would reduce your workload.
It means that, maybe we wouldn't have to travel to Cincinnati, which is not necessarily next door.
Right.
So it's about, I think it's about 5 hours.
Work.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
So, well, thank you very much for being here, Ken.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
I
we
think
appreciate
we've learned
your
a
time.
ton. I've been entranced. I'm sorry I haven't said much on the podcast, but I've been just staring, going, okay, I'm going to take all this in, take all this in, take all this in. Yeah. So again, I can't wait to buy the book and books and the new one coming out. Learn even more. So
and I'm excited for our listeners to hear this, to really get an understanding of what true shamanism is, because I think because a lot of our listeners are new to paganism, there's probably been some confusion, a lot of misconceptions, just like I had. And so I'm glad that we have this opportunity to clear the air and make it clear. Make it clear.
Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure. It's nice sitting around chatting with you.
Yeah.
Lovely accommodations.
Thank you.
Thanks. In our little tiny room.
Yes, our little tiny Convocation hotel room.
Next year, sweet. All right.
And we bring chairs.
Yes.
We bring chairs.
Mistakes were made.
Yes, that's very true. You've been listening to Three Pagans and a Cat. Find out more information at www.threepagansandacat.com.